We hear each other. Okay. Jonapod, servus. We can start like yesterday. We had very nice chance in Matica Srpska with Professor Hörcher to listen to Hungarian language, and it was very nice lecture in Hungarian in Matica Srpska there in Újvidék. So we really enjoyed yesterday in something which came out to be a very nice seminar there. Today we are having more, if I can say, serious lecture, although we wanted from Professor Hörcher to really give us something which is more like introduction into generally thought of Roger Scruton. So basically, first of all, I want to thank you all for coming here with us. There are also a couple of colleagues via Zoom, which I want to greet them. And I'm really honored and happy that finally we realized the visit of Professor Ferenc Hörcher, who is our today's guest, actually shortly but very efficiently in these 2 days, and who is really a very important political thinker for contemporary European and especially East European, Central European space. Somebody who follows, of course, sometimes and even comments about contemporary stuff, but his major and something which he is really very good in is classical political theory. Actually, his Bildung was very interesting. Yesterday we were speaking, he started researching and studying in '82. It was like yesterday, mostly in the art and aesthetics. And actually that was his first also contacts with Scruton came via this field. And then he went in '87, '88 to Cambridge, where he started
that was Oxford.
Oxford, sorry, at that time. Later to Cambridge, where he started to really seriously deal with classical political theory, especially conservative political tradition, and he came in that way in touch with thought of Roger Scruton and then with himself. So I could mention quite a lot of different affiliation of his work. We already saw an announcement at our web page. He's now officially research professor at Ludovica at Public Administration University. University of Public Administration, with whom we had also several contacts. Some of our colleagues were at the conferences, and I had the chance recently to visit that. But he also published some very serious book. Yesterday we had the chance to hear one of the part, and actually that was the first thing I ever heard from him about Justus Maser and tradition of the German conservative civic republicanism in a way, but this tradition of small towns, small communities, or something which Roger Scruton would call oikophilia, and so on. But out of many things that he published, I asked for him to really give us some. Of course, this is connected, and it's time to show those two things. Another one also that he recently published. This is really a great achievement. One comprehensive monography on Roger Scruton, which he's been working on for almost decades. And as you all know, Roger passed away in 2019, which is 4 years ago, and it's good time to have some complete overview of what's the general result of his work somehow.
It was early 20, but...
20 already, yeah. He was ill at 19, sorry. Yeah, my mistake. But actually, so this came as a result of this work, and this is Palgrave Macmillan's edition from this year. This is still hard copy, not really available too much.
By now I understand there is a paperback.
There is paperback already, and it's called The Art and Politics in Roger Scruton's Conservative Philosophy. It's really kind of comprehensive approach. You will see, I can pass it so people can see that, which is really including in it, of course, political philosophy, political theory, but also his aesthetics and many different things with which he was dealing in his life, part of that is his fantastic interest for hunting, for wine, and so many other things. So I will just pass. You have to return it back. So this is something which we'll have a chance to have in our library. And thanks very much to Ferenc for bringing this. This is collection which is called Tradition in Change, Scruton's Philosophy and its Meaning for Contemporary Europe. It's published in Warsaw in 2022, and mostly people from Poland and Hungary were working on it and so on. So for those who are interested, and we have people who are dealing with political theory here, it will be available here. As I said, although Scruton passed away 3 years ago, now the interest in him is rising with a very clear reason, because he was really touching upon many of the things we are dealing with today, many of the things that are changing our world, and especially in the crisis which we are facing. And I just have to mention that a friend of ours, Jonathan Price, is in a way, and some other good people, working on a foundation actually of Roger Scruton, which is publishing his last works and the things who remained. So one of those things is his work on Wagner's Parsifal, the music of redemption, which we have here. And I, of course, had to show the meaning of conservatism, my private one example with Roger's signature provided in 2015 when we met for the first time. Anyway, without further ado, again, I want to thank Ferenc for being with us, and please, the floor is yours.
I hope it's working. It's a great honor to be here, and I'm very happy and looking forward to this occasion of exchanges. And of course, it's a topic which is close to my heart. So I really appreciate the opportunity to introduce my book, which was just published this year. So it's a very recent publication, and it's something that as I said, was close to my heart. I started to actually write it after the death of Roger, because I felt it like kind of a moral obligation to do so. And what I will offer you today is a kind of an overview of his career as well as his work, because I claim the two things are connected. With some philosophers, that's not the case. With some philosophers, it's enough to read their book and that's it. The private life is another matter. But with him, I will argue it's not the same. It's the two things, his life and actual practical activity and his work are connected. So, and in my book, I try to follow the career path together with looking at his the formation of his thought during those decades. He has published. He was born in 1944 and died in 2020, and published more than 50 books. So just to put down, to write down the text of those books would be very difficult for any of us, and he still had to find it out what to write about and research on that and all that. But he had a fantastic, bright mind, and he was just sitting down and starting to write the book and finish at the end of it. So, a great man, and a huge volume of works, and over which one cannot fully estimate. So this is only just my own understanding of it. I've got 2 shelves of his books, but perhaps some more will come out later. And of course there is now a rising discussion, discourse about his work, a Scruton scholarship, one can say. He becomes a fashionable topic by now, so we are There is a legacy foundation which organizes events. This summer there was one in Oxford, another one in Cambridge, both in England, and we are considering to establish an association, an academic association as well. So my presentation will have 6 points to try to build up that career path and work. I will provide a general introduction, followed by his educational experience, his political philosophy, his views on culture and aesthetics, his metaphysics, and I will have a conclusion. So the introduction. I establish a framework to discuss his work, relying on some 20th century authors, and most importantly on Michael Oakeshott's views. Michael Oakeshott was the other major 20th century British conservative philosopher of the post-war period, one with whom he can be compared, but he did not really had much contacts, interestingly. We can talk about it later. So Oakeshott provides this duality or 2 pillars to make sense of the life of a political philosophy. The distinction between the Aristotelian distinction between the vita activa and the vita contemplativa, the life of action and the life of reflection. And I think that's crucial for everyone, because all of us have the opportunity to reflect on our own actions, our own life. But in the case of a philosopher, that's something like a must. A philosopher is someone who tries to make sense of life generally and of his or her own life in particular. So that's something specifically important for a philosopher, and in the case of a political philosopher, that's even more important, because if you are a political philosopher, one will certainly ask, let's hear your ideas, and after that, let's see what you act out of that. What is your practical relationship to politics? Because sometimes philosophers might have very nice ideas and very different practices. So whether the two can go well, or whether there are internal tensions, that's a topic to understand. So I use this framework to make sense of Roger's work, to see the development of his life and to see the development of his thought based on those experiences in his life. And the two things are in constant interaction. So it's not that first you act and then you reflect, and it's neither is it that you find out what you want to do in your life and then you act it out. It's always a dialogue. You do something, then you think about it, whether it was right or wrong, and then you try to update your earlier thought, and so on and so on. And in the case of politics, that's again something parallel, that you have to have a practical attitude to politics. You have your choices, political choices, your political affiliations, if you are involved in politics, and then you have to reflect on that and try to make sense of it. And the two things, once again, are not in a causal relationship one way or the other, but it's a constant interaction. So that's something that we have to keep in mind. Educational experiences. Most importantly, of course, family experiences. He has got a father who was a schoolmaster, so something like a lower middle class background, and his father has very strong political views, mostly labor, so working class labor interests or choices, and that's something which one has to keep in mind. And he was not a real believer, so a non-believing, an atheist, working class attitude, and still someone who had a love of his country, and in particular love of his own place where he lived together with his family. So a kind of attachment to the locality and to England as such. A kind of national leftist, if one can call something like that. So that's the family background, and he was quite a difficult person, by the way. Sometimes hit by depression, and sometimes even getting close to physical force used in the family. So indeed, it was quite a tense relationship between father and son. But at the end of the life, the two got close enough to each other once again, or maybe even after the death of his father. Next important factor to his educational experience is 1968 Paris. As I told you, he was born in 1944, so he was a young man, got married in France, and lived in France in Paris in 1968. So he had a kind of first-hand experience of what was happening there in the streets of Paris, the student rebellion and all that. And interestingly enough, it was there and then that he decided to go for conservatism. So it was like a reaction to what he actually experienced there, that he decided to go against the mainstream, so to say. Because he found it partly distasteful, partly violent, partly unreasonable what was happening there. And he tried to work out his own views. A third factor which one has to keep in mind is Cambridge, England, and in particular the college called Peterhouse. This is a very small college, a very traditional college, and a college which had those fellows identified as the Peterhouse Right, or the Peterhouse Conservatives, a small circle of fellows and dons who had a very specific kind of macho self-identity, partly, and partly kind of strong Tory sympathies. I have to name them. Of them, Maurice Colling, that's perhaps the most important name, a historian of the early modern and 19th century Britain, and a person who was quite close for some time to the Thatcher government itself. And the other one, maybe even more important for Roger Scruton, was an art historian. Because the reason why he was at Peterhouse was that he was researching for his PhD thesis, which was on the aesthetics of architecture. And this person, David Watkin, was his supervisor for that PhD, an art historian, and one who was rebelling against his own earlier supervisor, contemporary European art historian who had to escape from Europe to Britain, and there established a modernist trend in architectural theory, and Watkin, who was a classicist, a devoted believer in the classical principles in architecture, he rebelled against his own supervisor and the modernism that supervisor was defending. And in a way, Watkin was a kind of an elderly friend of Roger, and the two of them went hand in hand, so to say, to get against the mainstream and try to defend their own specific traditionalist view. And the last factor I would mention from his educational experience is his study of the law. He went to the Inns of Court in London and studied there, which means that it was not a university education, but an education in practical legal studies, learned from lawyers at the Inns of Court. That's the traditional way of educating lawyers in Britain. And that means that he had the practical experience of the law as understood and practiced by lawyers. He went through the whole course. He did not get actually a final degree, but for him, the common law, which was the subject of his studies, was crucial for his understanding of politics and history as well. The English common law, of course, is a very different system than most of the European legal systems, and as such, it's crucial for understanding British politics and, in particular, English politics, because Scottish law is a bit different. It's more closer to the Roman law tradition, but the common law is something that is specific for the English experience. So that's about his education. Political philosophy. That's perhaps the best known part of his work, and for the specific reason because he presents a very powerful version of mainstream English British conservatism. First British and later English conservatism. So that means that he belongs to what one could label as the Burkean tradition of English conservatism, referring to Edmund Burke as the foundational figure of that sort of conservatism. Edmund Burke was a late 18th century member of parliament and an academic or at least a private scholar, who published on aesthetics as a young man and later published his reflections on the revolution in France, which was his major breakthrough work in 1790, just after the outbreak of the revolution itself. So a kind of Burkean conservatism, which means a mainstream conservatism based on the idea that, in fact, politics is something which can cause a lot of harm, a lot of danger. So politics should be kept as small as possible. The state should be a small state, and there is a need for legal guarantees, and the rule of law instead of the rule of persons. And you need to take into account what you get in the status quo, in the actual institutional framework that you enter when you enter politics, and that means that you have to honor the traditional legacy of your political community, and tradition means that you cannot create ex nihilo. There is no tabula rasa, no clear paper that you can write on. You can only follow the path that was started by earlier generations. So that's the sort of traditionalist view of politics that he shared. And there are two sides to his politics. One is the activist side, and the other is his reflections on that. The activist side is quite important. First, he established a journal called Salisbury Review in 1982. So we are in the midst of the Thatcher Revolution, and he is establishing an arch-conservative journal, perhaps as a criticism of the Thatcher era. Because his main problem with that era was that it was based on the ideas of Friedrich Hayek and Milton Friedman, ideas of free market, free trade, and small state, ideas which he found, first of all, not English or not British, and secondly, not enough as a conservative position. Because one can say that this position is not much more than a neoliberal position. So, as a critique of the Thatcherite movement and government, he establishes this review and has a lot of scandals, one can say sharp debates. He becomes public enemy number one, partly on the conservative side, but most importantly on the left. He has to give up his job at Birkbeck College in, or is it pronounced Birkbeck? Yes, Birkbeck College in London, where he taught, because that was a leftist headquarter, and he remembers that the only person who shared some of his views was the lady who was working in the kitchen of the college. So the two of them were representing conservatism as such. All the others were the other side, and he had to leave England and went to stay for some time in the U.S. That's one sign of his activity, or side of his activity. The other one is his role and function in Central and Eastern Europe. He came over to first to Czechoslovakia, what was then Czechoslovakia, and then gave underground courses in Prague, and later on in Kraków as well, and also in even much later in Budapest. So in the Central European countries, he had a kind of an underground sect, so to say, and he was secretly helping those students and also some adults, because that education was not only for students, but people who did disagree with communism, no matter in what part of their life they were. So that's an all-important aspect of his life. That it started in '79 and it lasted until the transition. So he had this partisan past, one can argue, and that was very important for his legitimacy in this part of the world. That he was ready to risk his life, because sometimes the authorities were after him. He was extradited from the country and things like that. He learned the Czech. He fell in love in Prague, and so on and so on. So he became an honorary Central European philosopher. He himself sometimes jokingly called himself something like that, an honorary Central European philosopher. But that's something which one has to keep in mind. So that's the activity. And of course, at the end of his life, he got decorations from all the three countries, because after the transition, some of his students became very important public personalities and got key jobs in government or became presidents of their country or things like that. So he got decorations from all the three countries. I was present in London when Viktor Orban gave it the Hungarian one to him. He was already very ill. That was late 2019, and the Prime Minister was honoring him to give it personally, this decoration, and gave a talk about him. So that's the activity of a political philosopher. Then let's see his output as a political philosopher. The most important book is that Miša has already shown you, The Meaning of Conservatism, published in 1980. So it was a very early book. He was, let me count, 36 when he published that. Just after publishing his book, his PhD thesis, which came out in 1979. So that was the next move after publishing his PhD. And that's in the line of the Burkean tradition. And then later he had three more versions, none of them really successful, I have to tell you. Very interesting that this is a great philosopher, a great political philosopher, but no one book to provide his overall view of politics, no opus magnum, which is an interesting phenomenon, and it tells you something about the nature or kind of personality that he was. He produced 4 different versions of it. They change in certain ways, but none of them really summarizes his position. Importantly, beyond conservatism, he was interested in nationalism, or let's call it patriotism, because for some times he called it patriotism. Political philosophy of national attachment. I think the crucial book here is England Analogy, which is a kind of an elegy for a lost England, the England that of his youth, that was disappearing in his times. And he also had a theoretical work, The Need for Nations, where he tried to argue that, in fact, the nation is the substantial form of political community without which we cannot understand the nature of politics in a Western context. So conservatism and this sort of patriotic nationalism. And because he never became a nationalist like the national conservatism movement right now. He supported them. He was helpful and available for them. But he never identified himself with the movement of Joram Hazony. But people still associate him with that, but I would be careful with that. I would argue that it's more a patriotic sort of understanding. It's the English understanding of the nation, and not a continental understanding of it, or an American understanding of it, or an Israeli for that matter. And finally, his political philosophy has a green side as well. He published a book on green philosophy, in which he claimed that ecology and the defense and preservation of the natural environment is not something for the left, that in fact it is basically or most naturally an issue for the right. And that's a crucial book because he establishes a new discourse, a right-wing defense of ecology and the environment. And it is in this book that the concept of oikophilia mentioned by you, Miša, was introduced or worked out properly. Oikophilia is perhaps the key concept of his political philosophy, and it's a construct that he made, so it's not there in Aristotle or Plato or wherever. It's the notion of the love of the place that you belong to. That's oikos, the household that where you live, and the love of that household. That's the crucial thing for him, because he understood political affiliation as a natural thing along the Aristotelian line, that we are born into a certain community and we belong to a certain place on the globe. And that natural attachment identifies us or gives us the meanings for our life. And that's expressed in oikophilia. The opposite is oikophobia, and the sort of cosmopolitanism which denies the legitimacy or the relevance of national attachment or local attachment, for that matter. Right, that was political philosophy. Let's go for culture and the arts. His whole philosophy is based on his cultural criticism, I would say. He was educated as a philosopher of art, and therefore culture was a crucial notion for him. A crucial part of his philosophy is actually a criticism of modernism. He claimed to belong to a pre-modern world. Of course, you never know when he is speaking ironically and when he is serious. But in a way, he was serious when he claimed that. That was in an interview, actually, that he gave to me, that he claimed that. But I would say that that's not really a true description, because he was also a Kantian, an admirer of the work of Immanuel Kant, perhaps the most famous philosopher of the Enlightenment. So if you are a Kantian, you can hardly be a pre-modern figure. But the reason why he claimed to be a pre-modern figure was that he had major problems with modernism. He wanted to keep a critical eye on modernism. His favorite poet was T.S. Eliot, of course, and he shared much of his criticism of the 20th century modernist culture and popular art and all that. Beyond his cultural criticism, he had specific works in different branches of aesthetics. He had a very important introductory book for general aesthetics with the title Beauty. That is a very short introduction. In fact, there is a version of it, because it was published many times. One of the title is Beauty, a short introduction. But here he gives an overall view of the role of beauty in human life, and one can also refer to his BBC film, also entitled Beauty, which is, or is it entitled Beauty Matters? Maybe that's the full title. The thing is that he claimed that one of the key problems with our modern conditions that we escape from the experience of beauty. We don't like it. We are afraid of it. Why? Because it is a challenge to us, and we don't like challenges. We want comfortable and easy solutions, and that's in art that's called kitsch. So he claims that modernist popular art is more kitschy, and real art and the real existential experience of art is connected to beauty. These are the two terms that he uses in his general theory, and he gives descriptions of the different levels or layers where we can meet with beauty in our life, starting out from ordinary beauty, like when you enter a room or when you look around in your city. There are basic experiences of beauty or ugliness. Then human beauty, or the beauty of the human body, is also a different layer, which leads him to sexual desire, the erotic dimension of beauty. And we can, of course, here connect it to Plato's description of beauty. And then of course, artistic beauty, and the beauty which leads to the transcendental dimension. So this is his general theory of beauty, that human life is confronted by beauty on many different layers, and if we are unable or not ready to confront that experience, then our life is lacking an important dimension. It's lacking in meaning as well. In particular arts, he had two favorites. One is architecture, the other is music. As I mentioned, he published his PhD on the aesthetics of architecture. That's the title of this big book of his, published in 1979. Somewhat boring and somewhat too pedantic overview of architecture from a young man who tried to complicate things and was quite successful in that. There is an interesting dimension to it, which is his interest in phenomenology. Now, that's something that you have to keep in mind, that he was brought up in analytical philosophy, in the philosophy of Oxbridge, in the post-war period, which is hardcore analytical philosophy. And for someone brought up in that tradition, to go over for phenomenology is like becoming a traitor. And that was why he tried to deny that he was in fact quite fascinated by phenomenology, but that was the case. He studied the work of Husserl, Heidegger, and all the great phenomenologists, including Max Scheler or Arnold Gehlen and all the others. And also the Catholic trend of phenomenology was important for him. But he is not always ready to admit it. And he had this phenomenological view of architecture, that in fact what we appreciate in architecture is a kind of the interaction we have with a particular building or a particular architectural ensemble, like a street or a city. For him, here the relevant idea was that in fact humans are looking for meaning in the external world. They try to make sense of the world around them, and therefore they find things communicative. They try to see what the things around them tell them, and this way they attribute faces to the things around them, and buildings have faces. And that those faces will tell you their story and their meaning. And whenever we walk along the street or enter a house or enter a flat, enter a room, we are looking around and try to make sense of it, try to understand what is communicated there. That's the phenomenological approach that he uses. And that's very important because it will lead us to his final phase when he turns to metaphysics. But there is a further dimension to his understanding of architecture, which is his reference to the classical theorists, most importantly to Vitruvius and the ancient architectural theorists, and also Alberti, the Renaissance master, and Palladio, who had a very important role to play in British neoclassical architecture. So he had this classical line of thought as well, where the basic idea is that a building needs to find its place in its surrounding. It's a mistake of modernist architecture that they want to be exceptional, to be different than their environment. The basic idea for a building in the classical tradition is to fit in, to find its place in its surroundings, and to find the right proportions for its existence, to find the right scale. And the proportion, scale are, of course, and decorum are the key terms that he takes over from the classical literature. And these are terms that are connected also to moral theory and his ideas of what the good is in human life. And in this way, beauty and goodness is connected for him. We can talk about it later if you want. The other major art form that he was interested in is music. And in music, in particular, operas. And among the opera authors, his favorite was Wagner, Richard Wagner. Now, I don't like Wagner, so I am in a bit of a problem with dealing with that part of. Yes, it's a real issue for me how to make sense of that part of his work, because that's crucial. He published almost all of the major operas of Wagner, a book, so he had a lot of time spent on that. And this one is actually the posthumous work, which is his final summary of his views. And yes, so in a way, that's very important for him. I think the basic thing to understand there is that music has a special role to play in human life. I.e., when we try to make sense of our environment, of our own life in that environment, we are using concepts. As philosophers, we are looking for the right concepts to describe those experiences, the meaning of life. But through concepts, we cannot describe everything. Concepts are not really handy to describe our real experiences. And that's where art comes in, and in particular music comes in, because music is a much more sensitive tool to make sense of the world around us, and the opera in particular is quite helpful in that respect. And one has to keep in mind that in his last part of his life, he had this strange habit that he became the organist of a small chapel in Garston, which was quite far away actually from where he actually lived. So each Sunday he drove over to this chapel. Why? Because it was using the old and traditional form of rituals for their particular religious practice. And he joined that community as an organ player. He was a very good musician, learned to play the piano, and as an old man or in his last years, he became an organ player for this small chapel. And I think that has got a symbolic relevance if we want to understand his views of political community and his views of human life in a particular religious community. And that leads us to metaphysics, the last but one topic that I would address today. Metaphysics is crucial for the final years of his life. There are two books that one has to mention in this respect. His book Face of God from 2012 and Soul of the World from 2014. These are two lecture series that he gave. One he gave in St. Andrews, the first one, and the other one at Princeton in the US. St. Andrews is in Scotland. And in those works, he tried to work out the metaphysical conclusions of his philosophy. As a philosopher of the analytical tradition, he tried to avoid metaphysics. In analytical philosophy, that was for some time forbidden to deal with metaphysics because that's something that the continentals do, so let's not do it. That was how he was brought up in philosophy. But in his final years, he wanted to make sense of the basic metaphysical problems, and in particular, the problem of God. That was crucial for him. And of course, as a Kantian, he lacked the right philosophical terminology to address that issue. And that's why he had to be tricky and try to reach the topic in a circumscribed way, which is through art. What he is arguing in these books is that although philosophy is unable to give a clear picture of God, why? Because God is the nature of God is something that you cannot conceptually paraphrase. God and the divine, because he sometimes uses this term, sometimes the other one. Can be, if not represented, but in a way evoked or reached through the works of art. That's the maximum that we can expect in our life. We can reach God, but will not have, at least he does not have, a direct experience of the presence of God. He is very honest in this respect. He does not want to cheat. He said that he does not have this first-hand personal experience of the divine. Yet what he claims is that through art we are able to see that human beings have a dimension which is beyond the physical world. That's what he called the methodological dualism, and that is something that he actually inherits from the Kantian tradition, though it's not a metaphysical, it's just a methodological dualism. And his reference in this respect is painting. If you look at a painting, what you have got is really the paper and or some other material on which certain materials are put, and that's the whole thing. It's just material on material. On the other hand, if we look at a painting, what we see is, for example, a face, and the face of a living being. And that's the two dimensions that he claims is available for human beings. There is this physical reality that we can sense and experience, like touching the paper and things like that. And the other one, which is to attribute meaning to what we find there, which is in a way not there, because there is no face on the piece of paper that we actually look at, and we are still able to, and all of us can look at it. Same way, if we look at in his book On the Face of God, he claims that nature has the same sort of face. When we look out and see it's sunny, we think it's a nice day. We attribute meaning to it. We think nature has a face, and it's a nice and friendly face. And when it's stormy and raining and snowy, and we have the opposite experience. And the same is true about the divine. We have got certain experiences which we attribute to God, which are not direct confrontations or personal experiences, but experiences that we attribute to God. It's our attribution of meaning. Here again, the phenomenological approach comes back. Conclusion. My claim is that Roger Scruton was a political philosopher and a philosopher of art. As such, he both has a practice. He was an activist in politics and an artist in art, and a theorist, a political philosopher and a political critic, as well as a philosopher of art and an art critic. And the two things are parallel. They should not be mixed up. His views on art are not necessarily the same as his views on politics. Like in the case of Eliot, he was a modernist artist, still he liked him. On the other hand, of course, Eliot was a conservative political thinker, and he liked that as well, but the two things did not, they were not in harmony. So in both of these fields, he had his own practice and he had his own reflections on it. And the two things, actually, his practical approach to politics and his theoretical one to politics, as well as his artistic practice and his reflections on art, were in harmony with each other. Yet, the two, I think the interest in art and culture was basic. So his view was, in fact, that culture is upstream from politics. That's a very important point that he makes and keeps emphasizing. And there is a third dimension to this, which is religion. He claims that culture originally develops from religion. And that means that religion is upstream from culture, which means that you have got this construction that he builds up: politics and above politics, culture, or beyond, or above or upstream from politics, culture, and upstream from culture you have got religion. And these are the basic layers or levels of human life and human communal life, for that matter. So that's how I could conclude, and I'm happy to answer questions or take comments as well. Thank you very much.
Okay, just give me 2 minutes. Not that only we enjoyed in what was said, but really the presentation was like 45, 50 minutes, very precise. And in a way, Professor really presented the content of the book, as you might see, with all the crucial points. I just want to add a couple of issues that might be interesting for us in a way, and then I will give you the floor. I'm happy to see that people are very interesting. Just several of the things that might be also interesting. First, as you could see, first, philosophy can still be interesting and not boring like it is becoming in many ways as a philosopher, and there are a couple of us here, we could say that. And again, also what Professor Ferenc Hörcher said, and what, of course, Scruton was defending, is about political philosophy. Its meaning, it's completely different from what you can hear now at the 95% of cathedrals for political philosophy, especially in the Western world, in which first thing they tell you, we will not teach you anything about the politics, which means that we have only to deal with the abstract concept of, I don't know, theory, justice, freedom, equality, blah, 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 and that doesn't affect you in any way. So he is, let me joke a little bit, going back to the Marxian 11th thesis, as we were taught that philosophy is not only to, explain the world, but also to change it. I'm joking a little bit, but in a way, this is classical understanding of political philosophy, which you can see also with the John Stuart Mill, with Tocqueville, with everybody. We forgot that they were people who were searching for the instruments, how to solve the practical stuff and to explain the world that is going on. So in that sense, he was very much returning back to the classical political theory and the meaning, and this is vita activa, which also has to be very important. And also what you could see is also that every classical good political thinker, he always at the end has to make a system, which somehow you have to solve the problems about the basic sense, which refer you again to some kind of metaphysics. You have to touch upon the ethics and the culture and so on. So in a way, again, that was a reaction against the separatization, compartmentalization of the philosophy and the politics and everything today. Another thing that might be interesting for you is also we got fantastic introduction, but there are so many meanders, like his book on hunting, for example. He was very much insisting that it's also part of oikophilia of the system, and which is also important for us today, and to therefore to understand, especially what we had in this tragedy in March and in May. You know, this in the school when for the first time we have this. After that, there was such a horrible attack on any armament of anything. He was really is very good to refer us back to why arm is important. What is the role of it in the tradition, in the house, and so on. I mean, there are still wars going on and so on. It's very hard to find the normal, adequate understanding of its own tradition, importance of arming and the practice of hunting and so on. And third thing which I wanted to mention about us here is that a couple of years ago, somebody, I think East-West Bridge actually was behind that, organized translation of what is conservatism actually. So we got the first book, and I think the first text of Scruton ever translated here. Unfortunately, this is to induce somebody to think about that. The text which I used to give 20 years ago, something to the seminars, to the young conservatives and people who were learning what is that, and this is how I became conservative actually, which I would really suggest as the first introduction of his work, in which he wrote that, of course, after 68, and that's his impression about seeing what he referred to as a mob going there, and what inspired him to see what we are taught at universities. You could see many of those things even today in contemporary, and even more. He was saying, you can't see Burke, or you can't see, I don't know, any classical political thinker of the right wing. You will see a lot of Marx, Foucault, especially new French left in that sense. And also, I would refer, and I will stop with that, There's really wonderful book about his understanding of the contemporary fancy left, which he published several times. The last thing was in 2015. The book is called, the title is very important, so I don't have
Fruits, foods, and whatever.
Just let me see, because I think it's really worth of that. Thinkers of the New Left, first publication in 1985, and the last one was, just let me be precise, Fools, Frauds, and Firebrands, Thinkers of the New Left. In 2015, he added another chapter of Hobsbawm, Lacan, Žižek, Badiou, Deleuze, Edward Said, and all the, name it, the most fancy leftist thinkers that we are really forced to learn at the universities and so on. So I would really suggest you to it's not big book, but very interesting to see from the other side what we've been taught in our universities nowadays. And I will stop here, thanking you very much. And I see two hands for the beginning, so let's start with the older. We have to respect as a conservatives, and I'm joking.
Thank you, Miša. I will have two short questions, which you touched upon implicitly, but perhaps you can expand, since you talked about the importance of the personal life of some philosophers. I'm sure you had a personal relationship with Roger, and you mentioned his activities in Central Europe. So if you would like to expand a bit on your meeting him and how your personal relationship with him was, and how perhaps that influenced your work. And the other was his relationship to art and architecture, which I found very interesting. And perhaps I would like to know if he wrote anything, since he was a supporter of classical architecture, about the relationship with classical art and modern and postmodern art, which one can argue that there is an objective degradation of art in that sense, because at least in Slavic languages, art, umetnost, it's to know or to be able to, put a face, as you said, on the paper. And I don't think that art is that anymore in the postmodern sense of the term. It's more of a very interpretive style of, which has its value, but I mean the artistry, the knowledge of how to put something that's divine on paper has definitely been left out of the postmodern era. So I would like to know your and perhaps his interpretation on this, what I interpret as degradation of art. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First about the personal element. I got acquainted with him in '92, so after the transition. I did not know him when he came over the Iron Curtain, which is bad luck, because I was a student from '82 to '87, so I could have met him, but that was not the case. But in 1992, it was interesting. It was in Collegium Budapest, which was a recently founded research institution in Buda Hill. And there was a conference on, I don't know exactly the topic, on social science thing. And a lot of big names came, like Jon Elster and others, all of them from the left. And he was the only one who represented a conservative position. So I got acquainted. I got interested in that. Who is this guy who is swimming against the streams? And that's how I got acquainted with him. And then later on, it was basically through the Vandenberg meetings that we met, which is this pan-European, by now also American movement of the conservatives that both Miša and I attend regularly. But also he was quite often invited to Hungary, partly by the Common Sense Society, partly by the Danube Institute. So he was a regular visitor to Hungary, and I worked as a journalist for 10 years, and I had the occasion to make interviews with him on a regular basis. So these are and there were occasions that I visited his. I did not talk about this. That at a certain point in his life, he bought a cottage in the countryside in Wiltshire near the Cotswolds, and he established his family there, and he brought up his children there, and that's a very nice country surrounding. With green fields and all the horses and all the traditional farm life attributes, and that means that I saw what he is talking about when he talks about oikophilia. And for example, hunting, because he got acquainted with his second wife at one of these huntings. So I got quite frequently to see him, but he was not the sort of person with whom you can very easily get friendship. I mean, he was friendly in an English way, like an English gentleman, and that's rather different than we do it in Central and Eastern Europe. So even if he knew that we are like this, he was still, of course, he had his own cultural background. So he was not so open to talk about personal matters and things like that, which is, I think, fair enough, and you have to take that into account. But that was perhaps one of the reasons why I felt that I couldn't really get to the heart of him when he was alive. So I thought that after his death, it might be a kind of as a gentleman's agreement that I tried to make sense of his works and try to make sense of our contacts earlier through those works. So that's my answer to that first question of yours. As for architecture and postmodernism, yes, it was in architecture that he was the most traditionalist, I would say. In music, he was quite open to modernism. His own work, because he worked as a composer as well. He composed 2 operas as well. He was quite modernist, I would say, at least for my taste. But in architecture, he was quite traditionalist. And in a way, for me, that's a little bit too much on the other side. Because he was very much, he was only accepting the classical vocabulary of architecture. So the sort of theory that is only taught today at the School of Architecture at Notre Dame University in South Bend, the U.S. That's the sort of thing that he accepted. Very traditionalist architecture. And nothing like postmodernism. He made this distinction between modernism and postmodernism. He was ready to accept that modernism is okay so far as they were observing the lack of unity, the lack of this search for the wholeness of our experience. And the lack of beauty as well, like in Eliot's Wasteland, you feel that he is describing the wasteland because he is missing something from that. But with postmodernism, that's not the case anymore. They are very happy with what they got, and they don't, and they are only after enjoyment, pleasure, and that sort of popular art.
Expressing himself.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And I would also invite people who are at the Zoom. Serba told me that still there are 6 of our colleagues there, so please be free to ask or just type the question whatsoever. So, colleague Nikola Tutsako, please.
One, two, three.
Hello? Okay. Thank you very much for your lecture. I would have 2 short questions. Well, not so short, actually, but I'll try to be brief. First of all, in your opinion, speaking about the contemporary United Kingdom, it may be said that the true measure of a really successful political philosopher is how much he or she is able to become a teacher, sort of. Is there somebody willing to be taught by the ideas of Roger Scruton left? Is there a constituency or a political force left in the United Kingdom ready to receive these ideas? Because we can see that the Conservatives have become thoroughly Thatcherized. Maybe he failed in that regard, and certainly the Labour Party is not. Any of its factions are not ready to embrace this level of conservatism. So, is there actually a future for this? I might call Burkean, or maybe even one nation conservative tradition that Roger Scruton emphasized. And second. Like that? Okay, great. And second of all, speaking as somebody from Central, Eastern, or Europe, or the Balkans, I prefer this term for our region. Having in view this profoundly English tradition, this profoundly Burkean tradition of evolution as opposed to revolution, of these inherited traditions, how can we say that we could transplant these ideas into our context? Would it be legitimate, or would it be consistent with what Roger Scruton would have argued, to actually import these sorts of ideas that are profoundly grounded actually in the English tradition? And is there a point in seeking to adapt these ideas for our context? Thank you.
Thank you. These are important questions. Let me address them shortly. First, about whether there is a school or a legacy is still surviving after him. Well, yes, there is. First of all, there are students who were in his last years students of him. He taught partly at Oxford at this Christian college in Oxford. But he also had a position, I think, without salary actually, but a position at Buckingham University. And there again, he taught a course, I think a master's course. And there are people who were participating on those courses, and they are in a way quite happy to call themselves students of Roger. So that's one group. Then there is a political legacy. He, in his last year, was the chair of a commission called the Building Beautiful Commission, which had the function to work out the principles of the new legislation on housing in Britain. How to have a regulation which would support the cause of beauty. That was the function of that particular commission. And in fact, they could finish the work, although he died just 1 month before the actual report was finished and submitted. But that report had its political consequences, and it's still working out its effects. So I think that's the political dimension, and in fact, within the Tory party, which we know is in rather bad form and condition, and will lose most probably in the next election. There is a Scrutonite tendency. We have constant references to his work and name among the Tories, and the last National Conservatism conference was actually held in London, and a number of Tory members of Parliament participated and referred to Scruton's work there. So there is a political afterlife as well. We shall see how it can actually work out within the next after the next election. And actually, I would claim that even within Tory circles, there might be a reception of his, because in his final years, he came, as I mentioned, he tried to reappropriate his memories of his father. And through that, he had a kind of a blue labor kind of thinking. In his last years, as far as practical politics was concerned. Of course, part of the issue was Brexit and all the consequences, but another basic issue is blue labor for him, i.e. that conservatism will have an electorate not in the aristocracy, not necessarily in the middle classes, but in the lower middle classes and in the working class electoral groups. So in a way, that is also a tradition that might have its consequences.
Thank you very much. And I just have to react, that contemporary Tories, they are very far from poor Maggie Thatcher with all her, bad and good, but this is completely because I forgot this fantastic lady, Liz Truss, from Margaret Thatcher to Liz Truss, that's a very big difference. Only, but many other things are, for example, understanding what is family and even society, although she has this, horrible, like there is not society, which was actually reaction to too much, but it's not completely today. They are doing much worse job and so on. And by the way, one thing, I just checked it out in 2016, he was knighted, he became sir. We should not forget, and precisely that's also very nice to get, which is recognition from the state and its institution. Precisely, he was honored for service to philosophy, teaching, and public education, which means that actually he got the honor for his public work and education as well. And I heard that we have somebody at Zoom. Some question?
Yes. Colleague Dusan Dostanic posed a question on Zoom. So the question is, could you say something more about Scruton's changes in his understanding of conservatism? In the meaning of conservatism, he was more critical towards economic liberalism and Thatcherism than in how to be conservative.
Thank you for that question as well. Yes, as I mentioned, he had an oppositional position during the first years of the Thatcher era. And later on, that was not so bad as in the beginning. But even then, he let the publisher send his copy of The Meaning of Conservatism to Thatcher. So in a way, she knew about him, and she actually replied to Scruton, and we have got that document, the letter of Lady Thatcher. Well, then it was just PM Thatcher, and that's something which shows that there is an interaction between the two. But as far as the question is concerned, the development of his thought, I think that he always accepted capitalism as the economic underlying basic foundations of Western societies, Western modernism. His problem was with globalism, I would say, and with neoliberalism. And the political agenda of neoliberalism, out of which woke ideology and all that comes. So in a way, when he became critical of this economic Toryism or economic conservatism that is the legacy of Thatcher, then he criticized these globalist neoliberal tendencies. And people argue that he became perhaps a little bit more traditionalist as well, i.e. claiming that anything modern is bad. And in that respect, I think that they compare him to Leo Strauss and the American conservative scene. I did not talk much about that, but it's important because of course, by now the discussion is led by American conservative theorists. And in that respect, Scruton remained an Anglo-conservative, and he, and therefore I would say, as in the case of Edmund Burke, he accepted modernity, he accepted the Enlightenment, he accepted that we have to start out from the status quo, but he was quite critical about certain tendencies of modernism. And by the way, I hope this answers the question how he develops. So critical about globalism and neoliberalism, and although accepting modernism, criticizing basically consumerism. That's perhaps the term that he uses as the opposition, what he opposes, i.e. the sort of attitude to the market which in a way alienates us from each other, and which turns our exchanges, interactions inhuman, like when we order things online and things like that. I did not answer your second question, however, which is an interesting one, and which is about the adaptability of this theory to Central and Eastern Europe and perhaps to the Balkan. And I can only share with you my experience in my home country, which is Hungary, where there is a discussion about it. First, it was called the conservative paradox, that after a totalitarian regime, if you want to conservative, what will you want to conserve? Is it totalitarianism that you want to conserve, or you create something out of the blue and will want to conserve that? So that's the first format that it took. And then later it's a debate between continental and Anglo-Saxon conservatism. And that's something that is by now defended by political actors like Balázs Orbán, who is the chief advisor of Viktor Orbán, the prime minister. He claims that in Central Europe, we actually have our own tradition, and he also claims that it's much better actually than the English one, and so we should not bother about adapting that for ourselves. I do not necessarily share that view. On the contrary, I think that in fact our conservative tradition is rather problematic. And we have to handle it. Hungary took part in the Nazi Germany's war in the Second World War, and took part in the Holocaust. So there are issues of that conservatism that we have to handle. And also, I think that, in fact, the question is not whether there is something that we can, transplant from one culture to another one, but the issue is what we can learn philosophically from a personal experience, a personal embodiment of a conservative trend. And I think that it is there that he becomes important. So I don't think that we can bring English conservative ideas just for our own purposes, translating them into Hungarian or Serbian or whatever. What we can do is to see how he relates to his own tradition, and from that learn how to handle our own tradition. That's, I think, the way to do it. And in that respect, I think that we have to be humble. We are, learning a lot from Western Europe, and we should not forget about that lesson that we can learn from that, even if we do not agree with everything that is happening nowadays in Western Europe. It does not mean that the tradition that they represent have no lessons to teach us. And I think in that respect, Scruton should never be simply adapted to Central European positions. But I think that the way that he relates to his own tradition is an example for us, and to see how we should do our own job at home with our own traditions.
Do we have some more maybe at Zoom or here? No? Okay, so I will finish with my short question as well, and really thanking you at the end. This was really fantastic introduction. And as colleague Grutinović already recruited you in a way, this would be really great. We were joking, the whole idea is really to use this lecture and to get the transcript down, and then of course to give it to professor to revise it and just check it out, and after that we can get a very nice article for our review, which will be also, I think, the first presentation, even in a paper style, if I could say, in journal of. So we will have a very good overview of Scruton and good introduction. And thank you very much for that. So for the end. I wanted two things. One is, of course, we didn't mention international politics and international sphere. Of course, he was having his ideas and so on. I just several times had the chance to little bit speak with him, but never got into international politics. So I would like to give you, in a way, his fight against the communism was very clear position, but generally I think that he had even some others. So I would like you to give us some introduction in that, if he was referring to that in the books and so on. And another one, of course, he was, as you already said, involved in many so-called public debates, but controversies and so on, and that nearly very closely to his life. I don't remember 2017-18. There was some move for cancelling of him and this new fashion and so on. So if you would like to present us some of maybe the most important debates, including this last one, pressure, and with this I'm finishing, and really thank you very much for giving us all of this.
Okay, so first, Scruton on international relations. I think that's a crucial issue because, of course, he had a certain stature. So, in a way, he was the living conservative philosopher by the end of his life. So, people listened to him. Some of his views. He was very skeptical about the European Union. And he became a pro-Brexit person. So that's for sure. He wanted Britain free, get rid of the European context, the European institutional framework. And in fact, by the end of his life, he became English conservative. So in a way, even Britain was problematic for him in many ways. He was not explicit on that because, of course, as an English conservative, you have to keep in mind the interests of the empire. But as an English conservative, he had very strong views on defending English values as opposed to Scottish or other ones. Then it's important to see that he was very critical of Trump. He was not a pro-Trump person, but he thought that certain views that Trump represented was important, and he found that relevant. Of course, he was critical of Obama or people like that, but that's not surprising. Crucial issue was for him immigration. Of course, that was a topic very much in the air in England for decades. And he was very critical about the Islam and the Islamic, the political Islam, of course, and the Islamic immigration and the pro-Islamic immigration positions. And for some people that was something that was unacceptable, of course, but he was quite pronounced on that, because he thought that the political Islam had certain views which were incompatible with European values, and in particular with the common law and things like that. He was also critical of European migration to England, which was quite interesting because I made this interview with him, and I asked his views on Orban and his policies and so on. And he said that, well, of course, you have to be careful that whenever you open the doors for migration in your countries, then you will flood other countries like Britain. So he was quite outspokenly against inter-European migration as well, in particular Eastern and Central European migration to the UK. Yes, perhaps most importantly Polish, but he was critical of Hungarians in that respect as well. And mentioning Orban, it's also interesting that although they knew each other from the 80s, so in fact Orban knew him earlier than me. He studied in the same framework in a Soros scholarship in Oxford like me, but he participated in political life in the 80s, which I did not. And that meant that he knew about this underground activity of Roger, but he was quite ready to criticize certain policies of Orban, and in particular corruption. So in a way, he was dealing with him like with Thatcher. That okay, you are. I understand that you are on our side, but we have got certain principles, and if your practice and your principles do not fit, then I will let you know. So that's another thing that might be interesting. And I would mention the Paris Statement, which is an important document from the late years of his, which was actually born in the Vandenberg context, but then later on became a more European agenda. It's a statement of principles of conservatism signed by some famous people like Scruton, like Pierre Manon, like Rémy Brague, or Chantal Delsol. Yes, so
we published Serbian edition.
Yes, I think more than 20 languages were published this document. So that's a pan-European conservative agenda, and I think in that respect he played a very important role. And by now, my claim is that in fact Scruton becomes the lingua franca of Western conservatism, which means that his ideas are the most easily reachable and understandable format of conservatism. So, in a way, whenever you teach a course of conservatism, you can easily rely on his work and productions. So that's one question. And which was the scandals? Yes, I would mention two scandals about him. Or maybe three. One was this issue of the schoolmaster in the early Salisbury Review. I cannot recall the name of that schoolmaster. He published a piece in which he said that, well, children of migrational background do not necessarily understand the rules of the schools, and therefore we have got a duty to help them to integrate and in this way to try to control them. And that caused a huge scandal, because it was argued that it's a kind of discrimination against a certain minority and all that stuff, human rights issues were brought up against them. And the guy had to leave the school that he was the schoolmaster of, and Scruton was discriminated with the label of discrimination. The second one was the issue of his contract with this tobacco firm. He was as Miša mentioned, you mentioned it, he was a great wine drinker, but he also liked to smoke cigars. And he therefore defended the right of smoking. And he published certain articles on that, and someone then later on found out that he had a contract with one of the tobacco firms, which of course is a sensitive issue because he did not let it known, and then in that respect it was a morally questionable issue. So then he had to give up his position at the Times. He was a columnist there, and he had to leave them. Actually, that's when he left England or Britain. And the third, and in that respect, I guess he had to admit that was his fault. And then there is this third scandal. In his last year of his life, as when he was the chair of this commission, he gave an interview, I think, to the New Statesman. And in that interview, the interviewer had these sensitive questions about immigration, about his views on Jewish people in Central Europe, things like that. And the interview which came out was very critical about Scruton's position. And the interviewer, the journalist, published some photos in his Facebook account or whatever social media account, drinking champagne and being happy that now I show that this one is a homophobe and a conservative who is unacceptable. And next day or in a few days, the government kicked Scruton out from the commission. So it had a very direct effect. And then a long debate started, because he claimed that, this was a long interview, and what was published was just a small part of it, and in fact very tendentiously selected parts of it. And the fortunate thing was that in a way, Douglas Murray got the tape of the original interview. So it was, I think, published in the Spectator, or at least he wrote about it in the Spectator, and from the tape you could see that the answers to the questions were had a context which meant that he was not against Islam believers, he was not anti-Semitic, and he did not want to hurt Chinese people as such, because this was also an accusation. So after that, the journal had to admit that they were unfair with Scruton. I think that's the whole process is very interesting because it tells you a lot about English media circumstances and how politics and the media work in that country. And then the journalists were fired, and at a certain point the government had to call back Roger, and he got back not the chair, but a co-chair position, because by that time there was another chair, so both of them remained chairs of the commission. But he was the one who could actually write the text, because you see the style of the report. It's the text of Roger. So that's the third one, in which I think he won the case.
Thank you very much.